Before we begin, this script is based on publicly reported facts. Laci Peterson, 8 months pregnant, was reported missing from Modesto, California on December 24, 2002. Her husband, Scott, told police he'd gone fishing at the Berkeley Marina that morning. In 2004, he was convicted of first-degree murder in Laci S. death and second-degree murder in the death of their unborn son, Connor. His death sentence was overturned in 2020 due to juror issues, and in 2021 he was resentenced to life in prison without parole. In 2024 to 2025, his case returned to court for limited proceedings connected to new filings by the Los Angeles Innocence Project. NBC Bay Area, Paluetu, Wikipedia +2. It starts with a dog on a quiet street, a red leash dragging across winter grass like a line under a name. Christmas lights flicker over lawns in Modesto, California, but the morning air has that hollow sound, the kind that makes every footstep feel too loud. A neighbor finds the Petersons' golden retriever circling outside with no one at the other end of the leash. In a house where a nursery has been painted and folded, onesies sit on a chair by the window. Silence moves in and takes the biggest room. Scott Peterson tells anyone who will listen that he went fishing. He says he drove to the Berkeley Marina, and the bay was cold and gray and empty, and that he came home to find his wife gone. He says Laci was making plans when he left. Mop the floor, bake cookies, walk the dog. A clean list for a tidy day. But the list frays the moment that leash leaves the yard. By afternoon, family crowds the driveway. Sharon Rocha, Laci's mother, stands with a phone pressed to her ear and her eyes fixed on the front door as if looking hard enough can make a daughter appear. Friends pass out flyers that still smell of printer ink. Volunteers slide into the search without instruction, check the park, knock on doors, ask anyone walking if they saw a very pregnant woman in a white shirt and black stretch pants. Every description ends with the word due. She's due in February. She's due. The word feels like a promise the world forgot to keep. Detectives move through the house soft-footed and patient, eyes skimming counters, door frames, the washing machine. The Christmas tree leans a degree further than perfect. There are small signs of ordinary life, as if the day had been paused and will resume once everyone stops staring. But the sink is dry. The mop is dry. And a TV in the living room sits dark, mid-morning programming left unwatched. They ask Scott to walk them through the morning. He does, steady voice, steady hands. He speaks like a man who has rehearsed a speech he never wanted to give. He mentions golf at first to some people, then fishing to others, then settles on fishing, and the officers write it all down. He seems composed, and the word composed takes on an edge when spoken in a house-breathing panic. The search floods outward. Helicopters bite up the sky. Boats scissor the dark green water of the bay. Cameras gather because cameras can smell a storm. Reporters practice saying the name Laci with a little ache at the end, shaping the narrative with the gentle cruelty of repetition. The picture they use is bright, a smile caught at the end of a laugh, as if she's about to tell you a secret and you're both going to be late to something. Night turns the neighborhood into a mirror. Porch lights flare on. Strangers bring casseroles because kindness feels like a job you can finish. Sharon stares at the window of her daughter's house and refuses to blink. Someone strings more lights along the gutter, small stars against the dark. You could drive through this street and not know you were moving through a wound. Then a new name steps into the frame. Amber. She says she met a man who said he was single, a man who told her he'd be spending his first Christmas alone. She talks into a microphone with the terror of someone who doesn't yet want to be seen, but knows she already is. There are recordings, there are pictures, there are words you can't take back once aired. The story lurches. The country tilts its head. A pretty wife, a new lover, a boat. The math of suspicion does itself. Investigators go to a warehouse where Scott keeps that boat, a small aluminum thing with enough room for a day of quiet. They look at the concrete dust and the circular voids where anchors might have been poured. Count what exists. Count what does not. They look for the absence of things, for the negative space that shapes a lie. The dock at the Berkeley Marina remembers tires, taillights, a man unloading gear. The bay broods and keeps its answers to itself. Sharon speaks to the press with a mother's steadiness, a voice ironed flat by grief. She calls for help, begs for sightings, says her daughter would never leave home like this. She is careful with the word never. It holds weight. It holds her up. The calendar turns and the lights come down. The tree in the living room sheds needles. The flyers fade. The camera crews learn which neighbors will talk and which neighbors won't, and which of them, despite everything, bring coffee to the cops at dawn. The searchers keep walking because you can move forward even when you don't know where forward is. On a blue cold morning by the bay, months later, a passerby sees something tangled in weeds near the shore, something that turns the air into a siren. A body. Then another. Small, impossibly small. The shoreline crowds with responders. The wind carries voices you can't make out, and the long-distance grief of gulls. You can trace, on a map, a straight line from the marina to this place, a line drawn by the most unkind hand. Back in Modesto, the front door opens onto a house that has learned to hold its breath. Detectives return with their questions sharpened. No more time for soft shapes. The words change. The rooms change color. The law does what it does when certainty can be found in one place. It starts stacking edges until they look like a face. "Do you understand what we're asking?" an investigator says, not to elicit an answer but to measure the silence that follows. "Tell us about the boat," another says, as if the boat were a person who might confess. "Tell us why you dyed your hair," a third asks. "Tell us about the cash, the car in San Diego, the map to Mexico." There are explanations. He was avoiding the press, he was frightened, he wasn't running. But in a story like this, explanations are only as strong as the breath carrying them. The courthouse smells of coffee and floor polish and nerves. The trial opens with a sentence that seems written for television. On Christmas Eve, a pregnant woman vanished. 12 jurors with lives they left at the door take their places and hold their pens like ballast. The prosecutor walks a slow line across the room, builds a timeline nail by nail, hour by hour. He says the morning doesn't add up. He says the marriage was a house with a crack you couldn't see unless you looked straight down. He says the bay remembers. The defense stands and says stories are not evidence. They say there is no blood, no witness to a killing, no confession. They say a man's mistakes in love are not a map to murder. They point to the door the state refuses to open. Strangers, a burglary, a thread that might lead somewhere else if someone would pull it harder. They look at the jurors like lifeguards and argue the water isn't as deep as the other side says. Amber walks into the courtroom and sits down where the whole country can see her. The room listens to tapes of late-night calls where people lie to themselves because it helps them sleep. "I'm sorry," a voice says, and the tape recorder makes the apology sound like it's falling down a well. The jurors look at their notes and then at the man at the defense table, whose face has become a national weather system. There are days so long the court reporter's fingers throb. Experts testify about tides and currents and the way a body moves through the cold geometry of a bay. A forensic specialist talks about hair under pliers and concrete dust and the chemistry of hope gone to rust. A neighbor talks about a dog with a red leash and a gate that didn't know it latched the way it should have. The jury learns the names of streets in a town they do not live in, and the pitch of a mother's voice when she reads a victim impact statement that seems to tear the air. In closing, the prosecutor paints a day so ordinary you could mistake it for any other, then sets a single act like a black stone in the middle of it. He tells them about motive the way you tell someone about the weather you saw coming for days. He says control. He says freedom. He says the bay was chosen because it keeps secrets. He asks for a verdict that will hold. The defense closes with a picture of doubt. Reasonable, they say, and the word reasonable grows fur in your mouth if you repeat it too often. They ask the jurors to look at what isn't there, to give weight to the missing, to consider what the state asks them to infer, and what the law allows them to assume. They do not promise a story that fits. They promise a story that leaves room for error. Deliberations are a tunnel without windows. The jurors eat sandwiches out of paper and argue in small circles and count their questions like beads. One leaves the panel, another takes his place, and the room changes temperature by a degree that feels like a lot more. Finally, there's a note. Finally, there's a walk back into court that feels like 100 miles. Guilty. The word finds Sharon's hands and makes them shake. It finds the defense table and empties someone's face. It travels across televisions and kitchen counters and settles like dust on places no one asked to share it. In the penalty phase, the room goes quiet, then quieter, then something beyond quiet, and a sentence is pronounced with a gravity that makes the floor feel farther away. Years move like a slow tide. Appeals file in, arguments crest and break, and the record thickens into something only lawyers love. One day, the sentence changes because of what happened with jurors and questions they weren't allowed to answer honestly. Another day, the term changes again, life without the possibility of parole, and the courtroom becomes a time machine that only moves forward. Somewhere else, a mother rehearses the same statement because the ache doesn't diminish, it just learns new roots. Somewhere else, a legal team keeps gathering ifs and maybes and untested fragments, claiming a story the jury never truly heard and asking for another chance to tell it. Close your eyes, and you can still see the dog, the leash, the open gate. You can see a boat on a gray morning sliding across water that reflects nothing, a man in a cap, the drag of current, the way a shoreline can hold its breath for months. You can see a nursery that never got used, the kind of quiet that feels mean. You can see a mother who will not surrender her daughter's name to time. You can see a nation leaning in, not because we love tragedy, but because it asks a cruel question we're all afraid to answer. How well do you ever know the person sleeping beside you? Do you think she knew? Someone asks in a hallway, not caring who hears. Do you think she saw it coming? The answer is a shrug that means no one ever sees it coming. Not like this, not when the calendar says December and promises soon and soft and safe. The answer is that evil wears ordinary clothes and smiles when it needs to. The answer is a red leash on winter grass, a line under a sentence that can't be rewritten. If you listen to the tapes, you hear a man trying to keep a voice calm while the floor gives way. If you listen to the tide charts, you hear math that doesn't care about mercy. If you listen to a mother, you hear the truth you can't appeal. A child is gone, and the world should be ashamed for letting it happen. You hear, in the last quiet of the courtroom, a verdict that satisfies nothing and no one and still stands. There's a version of this story where Laci makes it to the park. There's a version where the neighbor never finds the dog alone. There's a version where the marina is just a place to watch gulls count the hours and boats nose the wind. But the only version we have is the one with the hurt baked in, the one where everyone leaves that house different, where Christmas becomes an anniversary of absence, where people in cities you've never visited can say the names as if they were neighbors. Some nights, when the bay is slick as oil and the wind has no voice, a small aluminum boat would look like a loose thought, a mistake, a ghost, the kind of thing you'd forget if not for the weight of what you know. People say the water keeps its secrets, but it also gives them back, piece by piece, not because it wants to help, but because nothing can hold everything forever. The shoreline speaks. The jury answers. The rest of us are left to fill in the silence with the lessons we never seem to learn. That love can curdle. That lies are only tidy from a distance. That the worst stories always begin the same way, on a perfectly ordinary morning when nothing looks wrong. In the end, the courtroom lights go dark one more time. The judge gathers his papers and the families walk out separate doors into air that doesn't feel like it belongs to anyone. A mother looks up at a flat, empty sky and says her daughter's name like it's a prayer that opens a door. Somewhere, a cell door slides closed. Somewhere, the bay starts a new tide. And somewhere, a dog waits by a gate that someone finally fixed. If stories like this keep you hooked, hit subscribe for more.